helpless, pain, shame. My father and my brother did that. The words came out of the young woman's mouth in a trembling whisper as the rancher untied the blood-soaked cloth from her thigh. From a distance, anyone might have thought the worst. A 51-year-old rancher kneeling over a wounded girl in the middle of the prairie, his rough hands working at the knot tied around her leg, her dress torn, her body shaking, but Elias Boone was not doing what it looked like. He was trying to save her. The Wyoming sun burned low over the yellow grass near Crazy Woman Creek. In a dry year, a bend of water like that was worth more than gold to a rancher. Flies buzzed around the blood, darkening the cloth wrapped tight around the girl's thigh. Her breathing was shallow, too shallow. Elias had seen wounds like this before. If the cloth stayed on too long, the bleeding could stop the wrong way. If it came off too fast, she could lose too much blood. Either way, she might not make it to town. "Easy now," Elias said quietly. "I'm trying to help." The girl nodded weakly. Her name was Clara. She was 22 at most. Dust and sweat clung to her hair. Her hands shook as she tried to hold the torn edge of her dress over her leg, like she was ashamed of being hurt. Elias noticed that men who had lived long on the frontier learned to notice the quiet things. He pulled the cloth loose slowly. Carefully, the knot finally slipped free. Dark blood soaked the fabric. But that was not what made Elias Boone stop moving. It was what he saw around the wound. Old bruises, faded cuts, marks that had healed once, then been torn open again. Different ages, different shapes. None of them looked like accidents. Elias had seen cattle crush a man. He had seen horses kick ribs in, but he had never seen a horse leave marks like these. He lifted his eyes toward the girl. Clara turned her face away. Her voice came out quiet. "My father and my brother did that." For a moment the prairie went silent. The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere behind them, Elias's old bay horse snorted and stamped its hoof. But Elias Boone didn't move. Father, brother. Those words carried a different weight out here on the frontier. Family was supposed to be the one place a person could hide from the world, not the place they had to run from. Clara had called Harlan father for so many years that the words still came before the truth. Fear had a way of teaching the tongue old habits. And Wade had lived under the same roof long enough for brother to mean danger all the same. Clara swallowed hard. "They wanted me to sign," she said. Her voice shook. "I wouldn't. When I ran, Wade came after me. That's when he tore my leg open." Elias said nothing yet. He pressed the clean cloth from his saddlebag against the wound. Firm, steady. The girl winced, but didn't cry out. She had probably learned long ago that crying didn't help. "How long were you riding?" Elias asked. "Since morning." Her eyes closed for a moment. "I didn't stop." Elias glanced toward the horse grazing a short distance away. The animal was shaking from exhaustion. Foam still clung to its mouth. That horse had been pushed hard enough that someone might already be following its tracks. Clara spoke again. "They'll come." Elias didn't ask who she meant. He already knew. Men who treated a daughter like that didn't simply let her disappear. They rode after her. They dragged her home. And they told everyone she had been confused or hysterical or ungrateful. That was the way men like that kept their reputations clean. Elias tightened the bandage around her leg. "You'll make it to town," he said. "If we move slow." Clara looked at him carefully, like she expected him to send her back. Most men would have. Trouble between family members was something ranchers usually stayed out of, especially when the family was the Pike family. Elias Boone stood up slowly. Dust brushed off his knees. His eyes drifted across the wide prairie. Cottonwood trees marked the bend of Crazy Woman Creek in the distance, and somewhere beyond those low hills sat the Pike Ranch. Harlan Pike. Elias knew the name. Every man in Johnson County did. Harlan Pike owned a large spread north of Buffalo. Hard man, cold reputation, and his son Wade was worse, quick fist, bad temper. The kind of man who enjoyed hurting people smaller than him. Elias looked down at Clara again. She was watching him carefully. waiting for him to decide what kind of man he was. Before we go further, one quick note. This story is drawn from old Western accounts and frontier memories, with a few details shaped for clarity and heart. The images in this video are created with AI to help carry the feeling of the old frontier. If this kind of story is not for you tonight, take care of yourself. But if you stay and it speaks to you, leave a comment and let me know. Now the prairie was quiet again. Too quiet. Elias Boone rested his hand lightly on the grip of the revolver at his hip, not drawing it, just feeling the worn wood under his palm. Clara noticed. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "You don't know what they'll do." Elias looked toward the distant hills again. The wind carried a faint sound across the prairie. Hoof beats far away. But, getting closer, he looked back at the wounded girl sitting in the grass. A girl who had ridden for hours with a bleeding leg just to escape the men who were supposed to protect her. Elias Boone had lived long enough to understand something simple about the West. Trouble always arrived on horseback, and sometimes it arrived carrying your own blood. If Harlan Pike and his son Wade rode over that ridge in the next few minutes and demanded Clara back, Elias Boone would have to decide something very quickly. Would he step aside, or would a quiet rancher from Wyoming choose to stand between a terrified girl and the men who believed they owned her? And if he made that choice, what kind of war would begin on this empty stretch of prairie before the sun went down? Elias Boone listened to the hoofbeats for another second. Then he looked down at Clara again. "They're still a ways off," he said calmly. "But we shouldn't stay here." Clara tried to stand. The moment she put weight on her leg, the pain hit her so hard she nearly collapsed. Elias caught her before she hit the ground. For a brief second, she stiffened in his arms, like she expected rough hands, or anger, or something worse. Instead, Elias simply steadied her. "Easy now," he said. "We'll do this slow." He helped her sit on a flat patch of grass beside the trail. The wind moved through the prairie again, warm and dry, carrying the dusty smell of late summer. Clara looked out toward the distant hills. "They'll find us," she said quietly. "Maybe," Elias answered. "But not if we get moving first." He walked over to his horse and pulled a small saddlebag loose. Inside were a few simple things every rancher carried. Bandages, water, a strip of dried beef. Nothing fancy, just the kind of supplies a man needed when trouble found him far from town. He knelt beside Clara again and poured a little water over the wound. The girl gripped the grass with both hands as the water washed the dust from her skin. She didn't scream. She barely made a sound. Elias noticed that too. People who had been hurt often enough stopped wasting energy on screaming. "You're tougher than you look," he said. Clara gave a tired half-smile. "I had practice." For a moment the rancher said nothing. Then he asked the question that mattered most. "What were they trying to make you sign?" Clara hesitated, like she was deciding how much to trust him. Finally she spoke. "My mother's land." Elias nodded slowly. He had expected something like that. "Your mother owned land near the creek, didn't she?" Clara looked surprised. "You know about it. Folks around Buffalo hear things," Elias said, her voice lowered. "It was hers before she married Harlan Pike. That explained plenty. Land that came from a woman's family usually stayed hers, unless someone forced her to give it up. They want it now," Clara said. Her hands tightened in the grass again. "They said it should belong to the ranch." Elias shook his head once. "No," he said. "They want the water." Clara looked at him again. He gestured toward the distant cottonwood trees. "That bend of Crazy Woman Creek keeps running even when the rest of the prairie dries out. In a hard summer, land like that could keep one ranch alive while the next man watched his herd die. Every rancher in the territory knew that. Water meant cattle, cattle meant money. And men had done worse things than this for a reliable stretch of water." Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "After my mother died, everything changed." Elias waited. "The first month, Harlan was almost kind," she said. "He kept telling me we were family." Her expression hardened slightly. Then the papers started showing up. Elias could imagine the rest: lawyers, deeds, signatures. And when those failed, threats. Did you sign anything? Elias asked. No. Her answer came fast, too fast, like she had repeated that truth many times in her own mind. I told them the land was my mother's. Elias nodded. And Wade didn't like that. Clara looked down at the bandage wrapped around her thigh. Her voice was quiet again. Wade never liked much of anything. The wind shifted across the prairie. This time the sound of hoofbeats carried a little clearer. Still distant, but real. Elias stood and scanned the horizon. Dust. Just a thin line far off near the hills. Someone was riding. Maybe 2 riders, maybe more. He turned back to Clara. We're heading to Buffalo. She blinked in surprise. You believe me? Elias shrugged slightly. I believe bruises when I see them. For the first time since he found her, Clara let out a slow breath, like she'd been holding it for hours. Elias saddled his horse quickly, then he looked at her leg again. You'll have to ride behind me, he said. Can you climb up? Clara nodded. It took a moment, and more pain than she showed, but with Elias steadying her, she managed to swing onto the horse behind him. Her arms hesitated before wrapping lightly around his waist. She was careful not to hold too tight, careful not to be a burden. Elias clicked his tongue, and the horse started walking toward the south trail. They moved slowly at first. No reason to run yet. Running only left clearer tracks. The prairie stretched wide and quiet around them, grass moving in the wind, distant hills under a fading sky. Clara spoke after a while. Harlan will tell people I'm lying. Probably, Elias said. He'll say I'm confused. Most likely, she was quiet again. And Wade will say I fell off a horse. Elias gave a dry chuckle. Men like Wade always have a story ready. For a few minutes they rode in silence. Then Clara asked softly, Why are you helping me? Elias thought about that. Finally he answered with the kind of honesty older men earned the hard way. Because I've lived long enough to know when something ain't right. Because too many men see wrong and call it family business. And because I've buried enough regret to know what silence costs. The horse continued down the dusty trail toward Buffalo. Behind them, the distant riders were still just shadows on the horizon, but they were following. Clara rested her forehead lightly against the back of Elias's coat. For the first time that day, she felt a small piece of safety. Not a promise, just a beginning. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And while you listen, tell me in the comments what time it is where you are and where you're listening from tonight. But the real trouble in Clara Bell's life was still riding somewhere behind them. And the next time those hoofbeats caught up, Elias Boone would learn just how far a man might have to go to protect a girl who had nowhere else left to run. By the time Elias Boone reached Buffalo, the sun was dropping fast and the whole town was turning gold in the last light. He kept the horse at an easy pace. A man riding hard into town with a wounded girl behind him would draw too many eyes. And eyes were the last thing Clara needed. Clara was still holding lightly to his coat. Not because she trusted the world yet, just because she didn't have the strength to fall off. Buffalo was not much to look at from a distance. A few stores, a blacksmith, a saloon already spilling noise out into the street. Somewhere inside, a tired piano was still trying to outrun the evening. A boarding house, dust everywhere. Same as 100 other western towns, but to Clara, it might as well have been another country. Elias brought the horse to a stop behind Dr. Amos Reed's office instead of out front. Less talking that way. Less staring, too. He climbed down first, then reached up for Clara. She hesitated before letting him help her. That hesitation told him more than words could. A girl who had been treated kindly all her life would not think twice about a hand offered in pain. Clara thought twice, maybe 3 times. Doctor? Reed was an older man with gray at his temples and the kind of face that always looked tired, even when he had just woken up. He took one look at Clara and opened the back door without wasting a single second on questions. That was one thing Elias liked about him. The man knew there was a time for questions, and a time to save them for later. Inside, the room smelled of alcohol, old wood and medicine. Not pleasant, but clean enough. Clara sat on the edge of a narrow table while Dr. Reed cut away the blood-stiffened cloth and checked the wound properly. Elias stayed near the door. Close enough to help, far enough to give her what little privacy he could. Doctor? Reed worked in silence for a while, and then he glanced over at Elias. This wasn't from a simple fall, he said. No, Elias answered. No, it wasn't. The doctor cleaned the cut, wrapped it better, then looked at Clara with the kind of steady expression older men used when they wanted truth and not excuses. How long has this been going on? Clara didn't answer right away. Her fingers tightened in the fabric of her skirt. Doctor, Reed didn't push. He had likely learned the same lesson Elias had. A frightened person would speak when they were ready, not a second before. Finally, Clara said, "Since my mother died." The room grew quieter after that. Even the street noise outside seemed farther away. Doctor, Reed nodded once, like he had expected something ugly and had just heard the shape of it. When did she pass? Last summer. Elias watched Clara's face when she said it. She was not just grieving her mother. She was grieving the life that ended with her. That was different. That ran deeper. Doctor, Reed finished tying off the bandage. She needs rest, he said to Elias, and she needs to stay out of that house for the night. Elias gave a small nod. I know a place. That place was Nora Bell's boarding house. A plain two-story building near the edge of town where widows, rail hands, traveling salesmen, and the occasional broken soul rented beds for a few nights at a time. Mrs. Nora Bell herself was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a voice that could cut firewood if it had to. She listened to exactly 1 minute of Elias's explanation before stepping aside and telling Clara to come in. No fuss, no judgment, just practical mercy. Sometimes that was the best kind. She gave Clara a small upstairs room with a wash basin, a narrow bed, and a window that looked west over the street. Nothing fancy. But it had a door that locked from the inside. Clara noticed that right away. Nora noticed her noticing. You keep that locked tonight, she said. And if any man bangs on it, he can bang until his fists fall off. That got the faintest smile out of Clara. Not much, but enough. Elias stayed downstairs while Clara washed up and rested. Nora brought him coffee that tasted like it had survived 2 wars and 1 bad marriage. He drank it anyway. When she sat across from him, she didn't waste time. Pike family, she said. Elias nodded. Nora sighed through her nose. I wondered when that house would finally spit trouble into town. That caught his attention. You knew her mother. Everybody did, Nora said. Margaret Bell had more backbone than half the men in this county, and that land near the creek came from her people. Harlan Pike had been staring at it for years like a hungry man at a supper table he wasn't invited to. That was simple enough. Simple usually meant true. Land, water, control. Most Western tragedies could fit under one of those words. Elias asked the question that had been building in his head all afternoon. Did Margaret ever say what she planned to do with it? Nora was quiet a moment, and then she said, only once. She said if anything happened to her, the land was to go to Clara. She said it plain. Elias set his coffee down. That mattered. A lot. Not in a court, maybe not yet, but enough to point a man in the right direction. Upstairs, Clara lay on top of the blanket, too tired to sleep and too tired to cry much more. She kept listening for hoofbeats outside, listening for Wade's voice, listening for Harlan's knock. Fear had a way of staying in the body even after the danger changed rooms. An hour passed, then another, by full dark. Elias finally heard what he had been half expecting since the prairie, a horse stopping too hard out front. Then another. He didn't rush to the window. He didn't need to. A moment later, the front door opened and heavy steps came inside. Nora Bell stood before Elias did. That told him something about her, too. Harlan Pike's voice came first, smooth, too smooth. The kind of voice that wanted the room to trust it before the words had earned a thing. Evening, ma'am. I'm looking for my daughter. Elias stood slowly. Wade Pike came in behind his father. Broader than Elias remembered, with the same hard face and the same quick anger in his eyes. Wade looked like the kind of man who had never once mistaken fear for shame. Harlan's gaze settled on Elias. For half a second, neither man said anything. Then Harlan smiled. It was the sort of smile a snake might wear if it ever learned manners. "I hear you've taken an interest in family business, Mr. Boone." And right there, before Clara had even made it through her first night in Buffalo, Elias Boone understood one hard truth. Harlan Pike had not come to beg. He had come to take her back. And the way Wade was looking toward the stairs told Elias something even worse. They already knew exactly which room she was in. That meant the trouble was no longer just outside Buffalo. It had already found a way inside the town. Harlan Pike's smile didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile a man practiced in mirrors. Polite, calm, empty all the same. Elias Boone stayed where he was, one hand resting on the back of a chair, his body between the staircase and the two men who had just walked into the boarding house. Wade Pike stood a step behind his father, bigger than Elias remembered, thicker in the shoulder, meaner in the eyes. The kind of man who enjoyed seeing fear in someone else's face. Harlan removed his hat slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "Evening, Mr. Boone," he said. His voice was smooth, friendly even, but it carried something underneath. Something cold. "I hear my daughter wandered off today." Elias didn't move. Clara was upstairs, probably listening to every word. "She didn't wander," Elias said calmly. Harlan chuckled softly. Young women can get confused after a loss like that, especially when outsiders start filling their heads. Behind him, Wade shifted his weight. His eyes moved toward the staircase again. Elias noticed that, and Nora Bell noticed it too. She stepped forward before either man could take another step. "You boys ain't renting a room," she said flatly. "So whatever business you got, you can say it from right there." Wade's mouth twisted, but Harlan raised a hand slightly. He didn't want this turning loud. "Not yet. I simply came to bring my daughter home," Harlan said. "Family matters ought to stay in the family." Elias tilted his head slightly. "Funny thing about family," he said. "It usually doesn't leave bruises like the ones she showed me." For the first time, Wade's temper cracked. He took one step forward. "That's a lie." Elias didn't raise his voice. "Then you won't mind if she stays the night and tells the sheriff tomorrow?" That landed hard. Harlan's eyes flickered for just a moment. Only a man watching closely would notice. But Elias Boone had spent 50 years reading men who lied for a living. Harlan smiled again. "I think you've misunderstood the situation." His voice was still polite, but the warmth was gone. "Clara lost her mother last year." He sighed. "She's been emotional." Nora snorted quietly, but Harlan continued. "She ran off this morning after an argument." Wade folded his arms. "Fell off her horse, too." Elias looked at Wade for a long second. Then he said something simple. "Horses don't leave finger marks." Silence filled the room. Even the sounds from the saloon down the street seemed to fade. Wade's jaw tightened. His fists slowly closed. Elias saw it coming before it happened. Men like Wade always believed fists solved problems. Wade took 2 steps forward. "You're sticking your nose where it don't belong." Elias stood up fully now. He was older, but he was not small. Years of ranch work had kept his frame hard and solid. "I suppose I am." The two men stood only a few feet apart. No shouting, no sudden moves, just the kind of quiet tension that made every person in the room hold their breath. Nora Bell crossed her arms. "If either one of you breaks my floorboards, you'll be fixing them before sunrise." That almost made Elias smile. Almost. Harlan stepped between them before Wade could do something stupid. That told Elias something important. Harlan Pike didn't want to fight in public. Not tonight. Not with witnesses. Harlan turned his attention back to Elias. "You seem like a reasonable man." "I try." "Then you understand I can't leave my daughter in a strange boarding house overnight." Elias shrugged slightly. "Looks like you might have to." Another small silence. Then Harlan did something unexpected. He laughed. Soft, relaxed, like the entire conversation amused him. "All right," he said. If Clara wants to stay the night, she can... Wade looked at him sharply, but Harlan gave him a look that shut him up immediately. Then Harlan placed his hat back on his head. We'll come back in the morning. He looked at Elias one last time. I hope by then this little misunderstanding will clear itself up. He turned and walked toward the door. Wade lingered half a second longer. His eyes moved toward the staircase again, then toward Elias. The message in that look was not subtle. This was not over, not even close. The door shut behind them. For a moment the room stayed quiet. Then Nora exhaled slowly. That man makes my skin crawl. Elias walked to the window. Outside, Harlan and Wade mounted their horses in the dim lantern light. They didn't ride away fast. They rode away slow, like men who knew exactly where they were coming back tomorrow. Behind him the stairs creaked. Clara had come halfway down. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. They won't stop. Elias turned from the window. No, he said. They won't. Clara gripped the railing. What are they going to do? Elias thought about that. Men like Harlan Pike rarely charged straight through a door when witnesses were watching. They did something smarter, something quieter, something that looked legal. Finally, Elias spoke. They're going to try to prove you're not fit to own that land. Clara stared at him. They can't do that. Elias gave a slow nod. They'll try. Nora stepped closer. What do we do then? Elias looked back out the window one more time. The street was empty now. But trouble had not left Buffalo. It had only stepped outside for the night. Then he said something that would change everything that came next. Tomorrow morning we find out what your mother left behind. Clara frowned slightly. What do you mean? Elias looked at her carefully. Did your mother ever hide anything? Clara hesitated. Then something in her memory stirred, a small detail, something she had not thought about in months. Her voice dropped. There was a box. And in that moment, Elias Boone realized the fight over Clara's future had not even truly started yet. Clara stood near the staircase for a long moment after saying those words. There was a box. The room stayed quiet. Elias Boone pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. Start from the beginning, he said. Clara came down the rest of the stairs carefully, favoring her injured leg. Nora helped her into a chair and placed a cup of warm tea in her hands. Clara wrapped both hands around the cup, like she needed something steady. My mother had a sewing chest, she said. Old cedar wood. She kept it in the back room of the house. Elias nodded slightly. Most ranch homes had something like that, and a place where women kept thread and needles and scraps of cloth. Normal things, but Clara shook her head. There was something under it. Now Nora leaned forward. What do you mean under it? Clara stared into the tea for a moment. When I was younger, I once saw her open the bottom of the chest. It wasn't really the bottom. It lifted up. Elias raised an eyebrow. A hidden compartment? Clara nodded slowly. My mother told me something that day. Her voice softened when she spoke about Margaret Bell. She said a woman on the frontier had to keep some things where men wouldn't think to look. Nora gave a quiet snort. Smart woman. Elias leaned forward slightly. What was inside? Clara shook her head. I never saw clearly. She closed her eyes, trying to remember. There were papers. Elias felt a small weight settle in his chest. Papers could change everything. Land papers, deeds, water rights. Even a letter could matter. What happened to the chest after your mother died? Clara opened her eyes again. Harlan moved it into the storage shed behind the house. Why? He said the bedroom needed space. Nora rolled her eyes. More like he wanted it out of sight. Elias rubbed his chin slowly. That shed locked? Clara nodded. Most nights. The room fell quiet again. All three of them were thinking the same thing. Those papers might be the only thing standing between Clara and losing everything, but they were sitting inside the Pike Ranch, and the Pike Ranch was not the kind of place a man walked into without trouble. Elias looked toward the window. Night had settled over Buffalo. Lantern light flickered outside. The street was quiet again, too quiet. Tomorrow morning, Nora said carefully. Those two men will be back. Clara nodded. They'll bring someone. Someone like who? Nora asked. Clara looked up. a lawyer, or maybe the sheriff. Elias considered that. Harlan Pike would not come back swinging fists in town. He would come back with something that looked official, a paper, an order, something that forced Clara to return home. Men like Harlan preferred to win clean in public, then be cruel in private. Elias finally spoke. If those papers exist, we need them before Harlan does. Clara swallowed. But the ranch? Elias nodded. I know. He had ridden past the Pike Ranch before. Wide land, open yard, hands working cattle, and Wade Pike watching everything like a hawk. Sneaking in would not be simple, but it might be the only chance Clara had. Nora leaned back in her chair. I assume you two are not planning to ask politely? Elias gave the smallest hint of a smile. No, ma'am. Clara looked between them. You'd really go back there? Elias answered simply. It's your land. That was all he needed to say. Clara stared down at the tea again. Then she nodded. There's something else. Elias waited. Clara spoke slowly. After my mother died, Wade searched that chest once. Elias stiffened slightly. And he didn't find the compartment? Nora frowned. How do you know? Clara gave a tired little smile. Because if he had, he would have made me sign those papers the same day. That was hard to argue with. Wade Pike was not known for patience. Elias stood up. He stretched his back slightly. Years of riding had a way of settling into a man's bones. We leave before sunrise, he said. Clara blinked. So soon. The earlier we move, the fewer eyes will be watching. Nora stood as well. I'll keep the door locked tonight. She looked at Clara carefully. You get some sleep if you can. Clara tried to smile. I'll try. Elias walked toward the door. Then he stopped. Something had been bothering him since the Pike men walked in earlier. A small detail. He turned back toward Clara. When Wade looked at the stairs tonight, he didn't look surprised. Clara frowned slightly. What do you mean? Elias spoke slowly. He looked like a man who already knew exactly where you were. The room went quiet again. Clara's fingers tightened around the cup. But I came straight here. Nora looked toward the window. Her voice dropped. Then someone in this town told them. Elias stepped outside onto the porch, and the night air was cooler now. But the street still smelled like dust and horses. Across the road, a lantern burned outside the saloon. Two riders passed slowly at the far end of town. Elias watched them disappear into the dark. Buffalo was not a big place. Secrets traveled fast here. And if someone had already told Harlan Pike where Clara was hiding tonight, that meant something worse might already be happening. Because while Elias Boone had been sitting in a quiet boarding house making plans, someone else might already be riding toward the Pike Ranch, toward that shed, toward that sewing chest. And if Harlan Pike found those papers before dawn, Clara Bell would not just lose the land, she might lose the last honest proof her mother ever tried to leave behind. Night settled deep over Buffalo. Inside Nora Bell's boarding house, the lamps burned low, and the whole town seemed to be holding its breath. Clara Bell lay awake upstairs, her leg throbbing, her mind still trapped in the house she'd fled. Elias Boone sat by the window below, hat resting on his knee, watching the dark street the way men of the frontier had done for generations when they knew morning would come with a price. Nobody under that roof was sleeping easy, not Nora, who had lived long enough to know that men like Harlan Pike never stopped while there was still something left to take, not Clara, who had spent too many months learning what fear could do to a soul, and not Elias, who understood better than most that the right thing was rarely the easy thing. Before dawn, he would ride back toward the Pike Ranch, back toward the shed, back toward the sewing chest, back toward whatever truth Margaret Bell had hidden from the men under her own roof. And truth be told, that is how many lives begin to change. Lives often begin to change in the dark, when a tired man decides to do what is right anyway. That is one reason I think stories like this still matter. Because they remind us that courage is not always loud. Sometimes courage is a wounded young woman refusing to sign away the last piece of her mother's life. Sometimes courage is an older man saying no, when every easier path would have told him to stay out of it. Sometimes courage is simply getting up the next morning when yesterday already took everything out of you. I will tell you something plainly. I have always believed the world gets colder when good people keep calling cruelty a private matter. Too many people see pain, shake their heads, and say it is none of their business. Too many people see someone shrinking inside their own life and decide silence is safer. But silence has a price, and usually the person paying it is the weakest one in the room. That is what sits with me in Clarabelle's story. She did not run because she was fearless. She ran because somewhere inside her, even after all that hurt, one small piece of her still believed she was worth saving. That matters more than people think. Sometimes a life turns on one scrap of hope, one stubborn refusal, one last decision not to surrender. And maybe that is what some of us need to hear now. Maybe you are not riding across Wyoming with a torn leg and blood on your dress, but maybe you are carrying something heavy all the same. Maybe it is grief. Maybe it is regret. Maybe it is loneliness. Maybe it is the feeling that life has taken more from you than it ever gave back. If that is where you are tonight, then let this old frontier story say something simple to you. You are not finished yet. A hard season's not the whole book. A bad chapter is not the whole life. And the fact that you are still here means something in itself. I think about Elias Boone in a personal way. Men like him do not make speeches. They simply reach a point where they know they will not respect themselves if they walk away. To me, that is one of the most important lessons in this story. Character is built in quiet decision, not the decisions people clap for. The ones nobody sees, the ones made in a dusty room, or on a dark porch, or in the hour before sunrise when a man has to decide what kind of soul he wants to carry into the rest of his life. I think many of us, especially as we get older, learn that peace does not come from avoiding every hard road. Sometimes peace comes from knowing you did not betray what you knew was right. That is a lesson worth keeping. So here's the question I want to leave with you tonight. When life places something wounded in front of you, what kind of person do you become? Do you look away? Do you call it someone else's trouble? Or do you stand your ground? And here's another one. What part of your own life still needs that same kind of courage? Is there a boundary you need to draw? A burden you need to set down? A truth you need to stop running from? A person you need to help before it is too late? Stories like this are not just about the Old West, They are about dignity, choice, and whether pain gets the final word. If this story stayed with you tonight, I'd be honored if you left a like and subscribe to the channel. That simple support helps me keep bringing you these old, forgotten stories, and the lessons buried inside them. And I would truly like to hear from you. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you listening from tonight? There's something I always enjoy about imagining folks from all over the world sitting down with a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or maybe just a quiet room, listening to an old frontier tale and finding a little of themselves in it. As for Clarabelle and Elias Boone, morning was coming. The prairie would soon turn pale with first light. The horse would be saddled. The road back to the Pike Ranch would still be dangerous, but danger is not always the end of a story. Sometimes it is the place where a better one begins. And maybe that is the final thought worth carrying into bed tonight. No matter how long the dark has lasted, morning still comes, no matter how many cruel hands have tried to shape a life. Dignity can still rise again, and no matter how tired a heart may be, one honest decision can change the direction of everything that comes after it.